I worked at a hospital, doing transport for a couple of years. The transport home base was in the basement of a hospital, where all the laundry was done, as well as supplies being sorted there. I hated working there, since after the incident I'm about to tell you. On this particular night, I was the only one in the basement when I heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator. I poked my head around the corner, fully expecting to see my only coworker on duty that night. But there was absolutely no one there. I shrugged it off. I'm not easily spooked, and nights are always slow. So I sat back, chilled in the break room for a little while and ate some snacks. Next thing I know though, I hear a loud bang. I walked into the hallway and a bed was rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides. It was very creepy, and at this point I seriously think my coworker is trying to bullshit me. So I radio him and ask him where he is. He tells me that he's in the cafeteria on the top floor of the building. I still don't believe him. He must be playing a joke, and I'm convinced I will catch him in the act. A few minutes later, I walk past the laundry room, and the moment I pass, I hear the machine start up. I poke my head in, and I don't see him at all in that room. I've got to admit, I was starting to get a little nervous. So then I walk into the laundry room, and the moment that both my feet step foot in there, all the machines simultaneously stop. I freeze, and then run out and head towards the elevator, and that's when I hear the whistling again. At this point, I know I am the only worker in the basement. As I am standing there waiting for the elevator, things start falling off the shelf down the hall. Boxes of gloves, tissues, packages of tubes. I am literally standing there and watching them all fall off one by one at the opposite end of the hallway. I shit you not. My entire body broke out in goosebumps. My hair stood on the end, and I had a strong gut feeling that I was being watched. I know I was not alone. As I'm getting onto the elevator, I feel what feels like someone brushing my arm. I went upstairs and found my coworker still in the cafeteria. I freaked out to him and got out of there as quickly as I could, and transferred soon after that. The creepy thing to add to it all is that I whistle mindlessly to myself whilst I'm working, and it's almost as if the spirit that was there was trying to mimic me. Creepiest feeling ever. My first apartment was very haunted. I have no other explanation. It was just a little apartment with 4 bedrooms and a living room, and a kitchen in the middle, intended for college kids to live in. It was a bit off campus and right next to a gigantic cemetery, which probably accounts for all the activity. There were 2 main ghosts, if you want to call them that, that is. We ended up just referring to them as the masculine and the feminine one. The main event that ticked off the activity was one night we were all hanging in our rooms, and most with our doors closed. I remember hearing what sounded like 2 people talking. One voice was light and feminine, and the other was lower and much more masculine. It was coming from the main kitchen area. They had a long conversation from the way it sounded. At first I thought it was a roommate with a girl he may have brought over, but after a while I realized that it wasn't anything like his voice. I creaked open the door, and the moment I did, the talking stopped mid-sentence. Not long after, my roommate came from his door across the hall, as he said that he heard it too, and we just kind of looked at each other for a bit, and decided to go for a walk, because it was very creepy. This event set off a chain reaction of weird shit. Another night, it sounded like something punched the wall as hard as it could in the kitchen after some jumbled speaking. Literally, blah blah bam, and it reverberated around the whole kitchen. It scared the shit out of us, especially because we were about to go to sleep. You would hear talking from another room on occasion, just weird mumbles and the like. Sometimes there would be more than one voice. You would always see shadows moving at the peripheries of your vision. More than once, we saw full-form figures. My friend at the time and roommate moved out after he saw something dark and human-shaped in his Skype window through his webcam, standing in his doorway. This was a short while before I left his room. Once, there was one just standing in a friend's room whilst he was away. I just ignored it and went into my room and locked the door. I think I had some shock going on. You felt like you were being watched quite often, footsteps all the time ranging from soft to hard. One time, it was around 9 o'clock, and I kept hearing someone walking on the grass outside the building back and forth, whilst the window was open. The unmistakable swish-swish of shoes on grass. At first I thought it was another tenant, but after a while, I looked and there was no one there. And yet I could still hear someone walking back and forth along the side of the building. What made it even freakier still was that I was the only one living there at the time, and the units were mostly empty because it was summer. My friend had a baking sheet thrown at him. It flew from the top of the fridge where we kept our pans, right at his head as he was cooking. This did happen after he was trying to communicate with the ghosts, taunting it as it were. It wasn't uncommon to have things like keys, cups, etc. knocked off the counters, or things having moved from their own accord. But the greatest and freakiest experience of all was that the first Christmas that I lived there. I'd gone home for break, and we had all left around the same time. We had locked the place up, and we had left. We turned off all the lights, and locked every door and latched every window. Whilst at home though, there was this video card that I had left up in my apartment. My friend wanted to take a look at it, and we thought we could fix it for him. So we drove the hour-long drive back to my apartment to pick it up. When we got there, the place had the worst feeling I've ever experienced. It just felt like oppression walking into the building. All the lights were on, and my friend's computer was playing a movie. That part freaked me out the most, because he had locked the door to his room and shut his computer down. Not only that, he had this stupid long password that none of us knew. I immediately thought that someone had broken in. I grabbed a knife, and we cleared room to room. I had to jimmy open my friend's room that had the computer playing a movie, but there was no one there. No sign of forced entry. All the windows were locked. Wanting to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, I chalked it up to just the apartment being weird, and we decided to both use the bathroom and then get the hell out of there with the video card. As I'm looking for the card, my friend just shouts, "Holy shit!" from the bathroom and comes out pure white, pants still unbuttoned. He said as he was peeing, something whispered in his ear from the shower. He couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was a feminine voice. He never believed me every time I told him this place was haunted. He didn't doubt me after that, and it took him a long time before he ever came back to visit the apartment. Finally, all the weird shit came to a head. It would go through phases, where there would be relatively quiet for a while, and then batshit crazy for about a month. This particular cycle was pretty bad, and my friends and roommates were getting quite bothered by it. He went to the landlady to complain, and maybe to get us out of contract, and she said, and I quote, "Oh, don't worry. We've had a lot of complaints about that in the past, but no one's ever gotten hurt." At the time I was an atheist, but that situation really forced me to change my mind on ghosts and the afterlife. I really felt like at times something was trying to talk to us, and at times something was just trying to troll us. It really messed us all up, especially my friend. He underwent a severe personality change and we don't even talk anymore. And as lame as the TV shows make it out to be, I really got into ghost hunting after this, especially because I had so many first-hand crazy experiences. I think it's something that we just can't prove yet. Death is something beyond what we can quantify to the best of our abilities. This story is about my aunt. She was the loveliest woman that you could ever meet, and was a big influence in my life when I was growing up. I don't know how all of this started, but out of nowhere one day she just went crazy. Let me give you a bit of background. I am a 6'2", rather fit man. I practice Aikido and can bench press 240. My father and his brothers are pretty much as tall as I am. Maybe less strong due to age though, and most of them have been practicing fighting sports for a long time. My aunt, by contrast, is about 5'2", and probably weighs about 110 pounds at best. She would get incredibly angry and out of control at random times, spitting nonsense words, and there would be absolutely no way my father or I, or even together, would be able to get her down. It felt like Dragon Ball Z Yamcha trying to get Perfect Cell into a UFC submission. She had about 10 times my strength. We needed to be 4 to actually pin her down and get her to stop moving until she calmed down. This was extremely scary, as she would just switch without warning, which was so out of character for her. I didn't believe in the supernatural, but my grandmother, a traditional Moroccan woman, was convinced that she was possessed. And honestly, it really felt like it. For those of you who don't know, Morocco has a pretty big culture surrounding the supernatural, sorcery, possessions and exorcisms, so most of the elders in the family firmly believe in it. However, at the time, the rest of my family were not buying it. We took her to the hospital and had some extensive tests done on her, because we thought that she must be suffering from some kind of seizures. But everything came back negative. Someone even recommended a psychiatrist, and although we took her there, it was of no help whatsoever. We were all becoming very concerned. So fast forward a few months later, and it was becoming way too difficult for us to handle. My uncle contacted a good friend in Morocco, who was an exorcist in his family. He asked us to do one very strange thing. He asked my aunt if she could put a drop of blood into a glass of water and leave the glass somewhere in the apartment while she slept, but just no way near her so that she didn't get up and drink it while she was sleeping. We were reluctant, but my grandmother insisted on her doing it. On the morning, the glass was empty. I personally am still convinced she just woke up and drank it, but in the Exorcist version, she was possessed by a demon, commonly known in our culture as a jinn. Giving him blood was just a way for you to welcome him and calm him down temporarily, and she needed to see an exorcist ASAP. Now we were getting convinced that he was right, seeing her often becoming crazier and crazier. In desperate times, sometimes you just choose to believe in a possible solution. So at this point I decided to believe in what he said, and we had to get proof that he was right. We lived in France, and we decided to drive down to Morocco, which was a 1,500 kilometer drive with a 6-hour boat ride, and then another 500 kilometers driving when we got to Morocco. During the drive, I have never been as scared as I am to this day. I was sitting in the back, my auntie in the middle and my dad on the other side. She went crazy at some point. We couldn't hold her down and she was trying to hit my uncle whilst he was driving. We nearly smashed into a wall, and my father had to dangerously choke her until she lost some strength. I know it sounds horrible, but she really was beyond it. So anyway, here we are in Morocco, getting to this village named Seferu, known as one of the biggest places in the country where sorcery happens. It's a rather creepy place, and not in a conventional creepy way either. What we all know of creeps are just what horror movies puts into picture, but the African creepy is on another level. We get to meet this exorcist guy, and he asks us to buy a sheep to sacrifice, and tells us that we should bring him the sheep's guts back for the exorcism to happen. My father and uncle take care of this, as I am absolutely petrified. As I stated earlier, I didn't believe in this. I decided to because honestly the situation called for it, but at this point, in a freaky spooky village in the middle of Morocco, we were advised to never eat anything outside or accept anything from a stranger who might try and curse us, where everything looked twisted as hell. I was losing it, and really could not wait to leave this place forever. On the following day we went to the exorcist's house, and brought him these guts. He put them into a bowl, and asked me if we were feeling strong enough to stay, as more people around would make it easier to exorcise. Well, I really wanted to leave, but seeing as everyone was staying, I stayed as well. My aunt was lying down in front of us next to the bowl, and we were sitting down around her holding hands, and the exorcist started saying stuff in a dialect that I couldn't understand. He gets sweaty and begins speaking faster, and I see my aunt twitching in what looks like pain. And then all of a sudden, all the lights went out. Holy shit, I think I peed my pants at this moment. The exorcist screamed something, and then my aunt screamed as well, and we were in total silence in the dark. I think the silence lasted for about 30 seconds, but honestly it felt like hours. The exorcist's assistant then came in with a lamp, and what we see is that both him and my aunt are passed out. The bowl is on the floor, and the guts are next to it. The guts had turned black. I'm not joking, they were red before the lights went out, and then they were black, as if they'd been singed beyond belief. I have goosebumps just remembering that and trying to picture it. The assistant urges us not to touch the guts at any cost. The exorcist wakes up and goes to put some water on his face, and then tells us to follow him. We went to a nearby empty hill, and when we reached the top, he asked us to burn the guts right then and there, as the demon was now possessing the sheep, and we could get rid of it. And that's exactly what we did. Since that day, my aunt has never shown any problems whatsoever. Her crisis period never happened again. Trying to remember this honestly scares the crap out of me. Just seeing her now gives me the chills, even though she is back to being the loveliest person I know. I am just so glad though, that she is back to the way she was. My mother, my daughter and I live together in the United States. It's generally a nice set of apartments here, but like in any neighborhood, there are a few bad seeds, but for the most part, there are just ordinary, hard-working good people. I do have some stories to tell about the upstairs neighbor. That guy was a crazy drug dealer, but this story is about my daughter's experience. During the following events, she was only 3 years old, and my job would require me to work the night shift as an inventory manager. So consequently, my mother would look after my daughter and drop her off at daycare in the morning, as of course, I would barely just be getting home. There would occasionally be rare times where I would finish work early and get to see her more, as well as the days I took off to spend more time with her. It was on a night where I was working that was the genesis of the events that followed. I was in my office when suddenly my cell phone begins to ring. I look down to see it's my mother, and I pick up immediately. I could tell that something was off. Her voice sounded worried, and she was telling me that she could hear wailing coming from a neighbor's house. And shortly after, there were several cop cars and an ambulance parked outside. She couldn't see anything, but there was a palpable feeling of dread that loomed in the air. It wasn't until next morning that we saw on the news that a woman living on the same complex as us was stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend yesterday. As tragic as that was, I had no idea that the incident would affect my family in the way it did. Now, I need to describe the layout of the apartment, as it is important to understand the story. If you look down the hallway from my mother's room, you can see into the kitchen and the open living room, and from there, you can also see into my room. As time went by, my mother and I would notice that my daughter would act a little strange from time to time. She never wanted to be left alone, and would regularly stare at empty spaces as if she was zoned out staring at something. Not only that, she seemed to get scared for no apparent reason. We'd always ask her if she were okay, and she'd say that she was fine. I was off from work one day a few weeks later, and after playing some games with my daughter, I noticed that she looked pretty tired. So I put on a movie for her in my mother's room, as I washed the dishes to lull her into a nap. I went down the hallway into the kitchen to start washing the dishes, and after a few minutes, I see her walking down the hallway. I thought she was going to ask for a snack, but she passed me with her head tilted, as if she were following something into the living room, then into our room. Perplexed, I stopped what I was doing, and I walked out of the kitchen into the living room. I called her name softly, but she didn't respond, and stood for a few moments in the front of our room, staring intently at the emptiness. I was getting a little bit concerned. It was almost as if she were in a trance of some kind, when then suddenly, she turns back and crawled to me so that I could pick her up. I asked her what was wrong and what she was looking at, but she just stared back at me with a scared look on her face, staring into the empty abyss of the room. I was bewildered, and after I calmed her down and put her to bed, I told my mother about the incident. A few weeks passed, and it was a night that I would have to work, so before I left, I prepared some dinner and snacks for her, as well as set up a movie in the living room for the evening. As I was doing this, she was in her playpen. I had little time to spare before I left work, and was a little tired, so I sat on the sofa and put a blanket on me to relax for a few minutes before I left. I was just at the point of nodding off when I heard her footsteps from behind me as she called out to me. "Mummy?" I replied whilst keeping my eyes closed. "Go away," she said in a very soft but serious tone. I was confused. I opened my eyes to see her facing away with her back towards me. "Go away," she repeated herself. I was half asleep and confused. It was as if she was talking to nothing, but before I could fully comprehend the situation, she hurried over under the covers with me on the couch. I held her tightly until we fell asleep in each other's embrace. Next night at work, I mulled over everything. I was getting concerned and putting together the events that had transpired when I got hit by a strong urge to call my mother. I can't describe it, but I picked up the phone and asked her to burn some sage in her room before she went to bed. As the nights that I'm away, she will sleep with her. A few hours later, at 5 a.m, I get a call from my mother. She is manic and telling me to get home now. I rush home and see her and my daughter crying outside. I ask them what's going on, and my mother tells me that she is not stepping foot into the house until it's cleansed. She tells me that she forgot to burn the sage, and that night she had a dream that she was walking down the hallway to the kitchen and realized she had no idea why she was going there in the first place. So she turned around to go back to her room, but there was something keeping her from opening the door. She wasn't sure what it was, but it filled her with pure dread and felt her stomach drop as she remembered that my daughter was still in the room. It was at that very moment she woke up because my daughter was screaming bloody murder. I entered the apartment and started burning sage. I stated out loud, "I think I know who you are, and I'm sorry about your death, but my daughter is only 3 years old and you are scaring her. Please, stop. You need to move on." After that, my daughter never acted strange again. I'm convinced that the poor woman who was murdered was clinging onto this world. But I'm not sure why she fixated on my daughter. I hope she found her peace. I was 24 and working at a very old hospital in a large Midwestern city near where I had grown up. I did choose a career in the healthcare industry, despite my experiences, because I really do love helping people. I didn't become a doctor or nurse though, despite my love and interest in the medical field, as I am rather squeamish. So, 1 month, we had to do a complete inventory and overhaul of medical records. Our hospital was finally getting on board with electronic records, so that meant a shit ton of work to do. We had to sort out records so that they could be destroyed by our contractor, as we couldn't legally do this on site. Records to keep and organize, and getting them ready to put into the electronic system, i.e. type them in manually. So that meant that we would have to work our shifts, usually at night, in the basement for 11 hours. Now, a hospital basement is creepy enough during the day. It's where the morgue is and usually where they transport the dead bodies. It's not like you can move them around upstairs in front of people. This particular part of the hospital had many stories of hauntings, but for the most part, I tried to ignore them. I have a bit of a reputation for being a bit hard to scare. So there's this one guy who works at us as a night custodian whose main goal in life seemed to be to scare the pants off me and every other girl working that shift. His name was Lewis, and he was forever trying to frighten me. So this night, as we're working away, we all hear bangs coming from across the corridor. We just assume it's Lewis, up to some practical jokes, as well as heavy footsteps outside the doors and clanking noises occasionally. We had a lot of work to do, so despite the noises we would always just tell Lewis to be quiet and please shut up because we were seriously trying to get this done. So near the end of the night, at around 3 a.m, it was just me and one other girl. She asked if I'd be okay by myself because she had to go home to look after her baby. I told her that I'd be fine and that she could leave. I was alright until about 3:20 anyway. Then the footsteps went from the hallway to the other side of the room, and the banging noises turned into someone banging on the cabinets. I also felt very strongly that I was being watched. These were old filing cabinets that had long, heavy drawers, so they were all metal. So you know what it sounds like when someone bangs on a metal object. Loud as hell. I kept yelling to Lewis that it wasn't funny, but the sounds kept on intensifying, close to the point that I started hearing heavy breathing behind me. I may have looked calm, but on the inside, I was terrified. I just didn't want to give whoever it was the satisfaction of knowing that I was scared. I just tried to ignore it and continued with my work. It seemed to be aware that I was going to ignore it, so it upped the ante. It would brush by my hair and touch my back and shoulders. I must have gasped or made a noise when it touched my back because it laughed right in my ear. It was a cruel and almost sinister laugh. I didn't even turn around and I just shouted for it to leave me alone. I stopped working and went upstairs for the night. No way I was sticking around there after that. I came back to work 2 days later and found out that Lewis hadn't even been in the building and that he had been on holiday the whole time. I think I always knew that the thing in the room wasn't him. He had never been that creepy. A few weeks later, I was talking with some older staff that had been working there for a long time. They told me that they don't like going into the basement at night because it has a reputation for the strange noises that happen inexplicably. I was around 17 on a solo trip to London. Late one night, I was meeting a friend at Finsbury Park tube station when some kids started harassing me. I walked out of the tube and made a right onto Seven Sisters Road, then another right, hoping to go around another tube entrance where I could call my friend to avoid these teenagers. As I was walking down Forth Hill Road, I passed a guy who was really tall and blonde. He was incredibly pale, wearing a long black Victorian-style duster coat, with the collar pulled up over the lower half of his face. I thought it was strange, but kept walking, thinking it was some goth guy who had come out of the Sir George Robey or something. When I turned right again onto Goodwin Street, I realised his footsteps weren't receding, but keeping pace with my own. I turned around and noticed that the guy had come around the corner and was about a quarter of a block behind me, so I kept walking until I realised that the street ended with a dead end. Shit. So I mustered my courage to fight off this creep and turn around and go back the way I came. And the guy is gone. I look around and there's no doorways, no alleys, nowhere that I could see that he might have gone. I go back down to Fonthill Hill Road and I look up and down the street. Nothing. He's just vanished into thin air. I pulled my coat closer, ran back to the tube and hustled myself back to my hostel. When I later told my friend about the night, he teased me that it must have been Spring-Heeled Jack, and I'm not so sure that it wasn't.